Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Globe Summit. I am Janae Osterheld, founder of A Beautiful Resistance for the Boston Globe, deputy managing editor of Talent, Culture, and Development, and we are so happy to have you here today. I get the distinct honor and privilege to be in community with Corrine Reynolds, Nightlife czar, community partner, DJ extraordinaire Real P, and owner of Hue and change maker for many years in our nightlife sector, Robert Eugene.
Thank you.
Rob.
Rob. I am Boston.
Yeah, that I am Boston on Instagram. If anyone needs to know the legend. I want to start first with why nightlife matters, because I feel like when we have these conversations, people think, well, why are we fighting for nightlife? Why are we fighting for parties? And they don't understand the essential nature of joy, of community building, and of respite. So why does nightlife matter?
Well, it's where we express ourselves. It's where we hold space for ourselves. It's where we heal. You know, you go to work and you have home, but where's that third space that you're enjoying yourself, you're creative, that you're being loved on, that you're exerting energy in a way that you have chosen? And I think that's why the night is so important.
Yeah, I mean, everything that Corian said, that is definitely true. As a DJ, I think for me, it's a release, be able to speak to my community through music, be able to engage folks through music, through art, and just create community, create a space where we can be ourselves. A lot of the times as Black and brown people, you know, you go into an office, sometimes you got to code switch and not necessarily be yourself in the office. Nightlife and gatherings give you that opportunity to be yourself, which could be a release for a lot of people.
Yeah. Totally agree. Just to add on, it's just a place to unwind and be yourself, feel free. There's nothing like singing along to a song and 100 other people are singing that same song and just feeling that warmth and that love of just being in the moment. So,
it always makes me think of Ernie Barnes' artwork in the Sugar Shack, which Marvin Gaye used on his album cover, and Good Times used. But it's such a iconic and historic painting because it shows us dancing in our full joy, eyes closed, fully liberated in our love and our Blackness. And, you know, in Boston, I never want to erase our identity here because we are very much Black and in Boston, and, you know, a fourth of the population here is Black. And there are spaces like you, like Silk R&B, Estella, and I can just go on and on and on, where we do have community and spaces, but there's still a lot of work to be done when we talk about equitable nightlife spaces for Black folks, for brown folks, for Asian folks, for queer folks. What is the work that needs to still be done?
I know I can talk from a government standpoint, but I want to let y'all say what you think is important that needs to be done.
I mean, so I grew up here in Boston. I went to BU for undergrad. I'm literally on my old block. And I started throwing parties there. And at the time, you know, the group that I was working with was a very diverse group. And so the parties always felt like a United Nations type of feel, like all different walks of life in different parts of the world. And it was all about the music and enjoying the space. I feel like Boston, for a long time, has been very segregated in the nightlife space. I think over time it's gotten a lot better. There's still some places that are not as inclusive as others, but, you know, Real P and I have done a lot of work and are in new spaces and creating new safe spaces by the parties that we're throwing and the events that we're hosting that weren't welcoming to us, you know, just years ago. So I think we're moving in the right direction. I think we still have a lot further to go. I think that new ownership and new spaces like, you know, Hue, for example, Grace by Nia, Estella, as you mentioned, Pearl, like having equity in the nightlife space makes a huge difference. And just because it's Black owned doesn't mean it's just for Black people, right? Like it's all inclusive. It's just more welcoming. And so I think that's the direction like Boston needs to continue to go.
Yeah, I think it's access at the end of the day, you know, access to ownership, you know, like the Hues of the world, You know, for me as a person who curates events, access to venues, access to the contact to be able to broker that relationship. So I think it's access all around. We can do a better job at that as a city. It is a lot better than it was 10 years ago, I will say that. But I think access is that one word that stands out to me.
Yeah, just piggybacking on what they said, I actually moved here permanently 10 years ago, and the Boston that I see now is completely different from the Boston that was then. There was no Bustin' Well Black. There was no Hugh. I didn't know about DJ Real P, right? You had to kind of find those spaces, and there's still a lot of work that we have to do. And in this job, I've heard you know, Boston has a reputation for being more of a pub and sports town, but there is an outcry for queer spaces. There's an outcry for more culturally specific spaces. And so, and there's also, you know, access and knowledge of how to create those spaces. So how do we acquire space? We have a space grant at the City of Boston that helps you create that space physically. How do we support and invest in those spaces? And then also, how do you permit for that, right? It's hard. If you've never gone through like a city permitting process, where do you even start? And so part of my role is to make that easier, more transparent, and just be a liaison between y'all so that I can kind of explain it to you and help you get connected to the right people. And I think that's what we need more in community to create more spaces.
Absolutely.
And even when I moved here 5 years ago, it's much, much different than it was back then. Can Rob, you specifically, because even though I wasn't here, I've done enough research and been around Rob enough to know about Blue Wave and Rob's like
the good old days.
Yeah, Rob's 20 years of kind of cultivating relationships with people who did not always have relationships with our community so that he could create space for us. And I really want to thank you for that. And also just ask you about your journey, because it was always kind of your dream to have a space like Hugh. And when we talk about ownership, a lot of times people think, oh, well, if it's Black owned, it has to be in Roxbury or Dorchester. And I always want to build up the block. I always want to give to our neighborhoods that are predominantly Black. But it is also important to be radical and have spaces that are in Copley, that are in Seaport, to make sure that we are not erased from any space and have that open door to every space. So can you talk about that journey?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I started throwing parties here at BU. Started in like 2000, I'm not gonna say, but around 2000, let's say early 2000s, I started Blue Wave. So at the time, there really wasn't a safe space for us. There was a lot of places that, you know, that might play hip hop, but you had to wear like dress shoes or, you know, a button up shirt just to step foot in the door. So it's like what was supposed to be a time to relax and unwind, you had to dress like you were going to work still.
To prom.
So, you know, I had the fortunate opportunity to create this night at Blue Wave, and I hosted a hip hop and R&B night for 8 years. And it only ended because the venue ended up being sold. But since then, like, I realized that I had a passion for like bringing people together and, you know, creating spaces and creating new opportunities. And it's really just like networking and continuing to build relationships along the way. You know, I work with Hennessy also. This is my 8th year. That actually opened a lot of doors because I had a big brand and I had a budget behind me. And, you know, those opportunities, it helped me build relationships and trust amongst ownership and management across the city. And, you know, that helped us get our opportunity at Silk, being able to be at Big Nightlife. And, you know, since then, so many other opportunities have come for other promoters in the city. I want to give a shout out definitely to the Big Night Entertainment Group, because they're one of the few that really opened the doors to these opportunities that let us curate events of, you know, culturally relevant events. But for myself and my journey, you know, when during quarantine, it was just like a lot of like reflecting, like, all right, what's next? What am I going to do? Like, you know, it's time to like level up, so to say. And I was very intentional and started really looking for a space to open. And then, you know, the guys that I ended up partnering with had the same vision until Hugh came about. So.
And Rob's super humble, but like he is a change maker. Like he makes things go in the city. Yeah. Like I personally like owe a lot to Rob. He's gave me my first residency as a DJ in the city. Like he booked me early on, like 2007 MD Wave, you know, like so allowed me to create my network and actually fall in love with the music that I want to play for the people. So thank you, Rob.
Appreciate that.
Rob was one of the first supporters of A Beautiful Resistance as well. So it's really not a joke when we say Rob is a champion of the people.
Yeah, just to add, it's like, you know, it's one thing to like create opportunities for myself, but you know, I don't mind being the first at whatever it is, but I don't want to be the last. Like I want to open the door and then hold it open for the next person to come up.
Amen.
And you brought up Silk R&B. Shameless plug. Please go to A Beautiful Resistance and watch the Silk R&B episode, and also watch the episode of Robin Hermela's Black Love. But talking about Silk R&B, P, can you give the people who don't know a summary of what Silk R&B is and how having that partnership with Big Night has led to so many other people being able to get into that space that never would have been in that space before?
Yeah, so Silk is an R&B party. I feel like it's more than that now. It's an experience. It's like a love zone, a love fest that started in 2018, initially at the W, and we've grown it now from like 125 people to close to 2,000 people at Big Nightlife. And for us, Silk is really based on love. Our motto is all R&B, all love, all night. R&B music transcends generations, transcends colors, cultures, doesn't matter. Like my grandmother, who was 90 when she passed, loved R&B, loved Anita Baker. So we like to really dive into the records, into the meaning behind these songs, and tell stories through DJing. And ultimately, hopefully you dance and have a good time. But I'm very music centric, so if you come to Silk, everything is built around the music, touching you, making sure you're identifying with it, all that sort. So it really started as kind of being a renegade from the club circuit. I did the club circuit downtown, the rumors, the venues, all of that for years. And it was like every time I played R&B in the club when I should be playing, you know, hype music, people looked at me like I was crazy. Like, why are you playing this? So I kind of intentionally removed myself and wanted to curate something that spoke to me and spoke to the people that love the music that I love. And clearly there's a lot of people that love the music I love in the city. And it's been championed by, you know, Janae, by a bunch of other people. So we hope to, you know, continue growing that and continue opening the door for other promoters and event curators to show that like you can curate and produce things that you like. You don't have to stick in a bubble and be told by a promoter or manager or owner, like this is what you have to do. You can step out the box, start something small and grow it and scale it to the size you want.
P, can you speak, can you shout out a few of the people who have come through those doors at Big Night and some of the other spaces after Silk? Because there's so many events that have come after the two of you have teamed up.
Yeah, well, as attendees or like as event curators?
Event curator. I mean, attendees, I can speak. I'm going to get to that when I go to Korean.
I was like, attendees is crazy. Event curators, I mean, so shout out to Tribe, shout out to the team over at World Africa. Oh man, shout out to B-Side, Cisco. Like there are so many people from so many different cultures. It's not just black and brown folks, or Asian folks, Latinos. And like Rob said, give credit to Big Night for recognizing that, you know, after we kind of, you know, smashed our first Silk, you know, we're like, hey, we got to open it up. You got to do more culturally relevant events here. And to their credit, they did the homework, they did the outreach, and got folks in there. And now, I mean, I would say Big Night, Grand, Grace by Nia, those are staples in the city. And folks look to that to kind of set the barometer moving forward.
And something that I love about Silk and Hugh and Grace, especially when I walk into Grace on certain Fridays and Saturday nights, is like everyone's in there. It's black people, it's white people, is every Asian people, Latino people, queer people, is like every sector of the area is in these spaces. Corinne, can you talk a little bit about the efforts being made to kind of create spaces for, especially for queer community in Boston, because I feel like we talk a lot about efforts for Black and brown folks in POC, but we don't often remember that there used to be spaces for queer folks in Boston, and now there's not many at all. Yeah. And I think it's like really important that we talk about any efforts and work being done for that.
Yeah, it's important, right? Right now we have Danny's Queer Bar that is opening up, and they are actually a space grant recipient. I was just there yesterday, so it's really exciting to see the work that's being done now and what it will look like when they finally open. And then also we have to acknowledge that there is a lack thereof of ownership for queer people of color. That we don't own spaces. And so what people are doing is they're hopping around throughout the city to places like Game On and other places where it wasn't built for those folks. So what we're trying to do is empower folks with the tools that they need to start businesses that focus around the spaces that they're trying to create. We want to amplify the issue so that we can direct resources. And so what I'm doing is I'm doing a lot of research and development and listening towards and compiling this information to really identify what is the issue with Boston's nightlife? Why is there a lack of queer spaces? Why is there a lack of Caribbean spaces, right, that are in downtown or in the seaport? Really understanding the issue and the barriers to that, and then coming up with solutions. And a part of that solution team will be the night committee that we will soon announce. I know everybody's waiting. I'm a team of one in 6 months into the job, and we got 300 applications. So that shows the hunger that there is to be a part of the conversation, to be a part of the solutions. And I'm just here to create space so that folks can give their input. Beyond night committee, conversations like this, going to neighborhood meetings and listening to residents and business owners. That's a part of the work.
And you brought up the Caribbean community. I want to talk a little bit about just, one, we have a couple of people on the couch that are from those communities that can speak to that. And also there's like the Afro Beats branch, World Africa. Can you speak a little bit about the growing, because we've seen what's happened to the parades. So the growing need to create nightlife spaces for the nuanced identities within the diaspora.
Who wants to take it?
Either of you.
Well, I can speak on my behalf for like Q. We've done Caribbean-focused events, Afro-beats events, queer events. We're doing a monthly drag brunch now at U. So, all the things that you're talking about, I'm trying to create in this space specifically. But, obviously the need for ownership and equity, is also needed, and I feel like it comes down the line. If anything, myself and P can attest to this, like you start as a promoter or event curator, you build a following, and then, when it's time to own something, like you already established that reputation, or, you have that following now, so it's a lot easier when it's time to open the doors and say, hey, I have something now. I think the fact that I've been in nightlife for 20 plus years is a big reason why he was so successful. All those relationships along the line and the people I've met and, the relationships I continue to cultivate has been a huge factor in the success there, so.
Yeah, I think, our Caribbean, our culture, institutions, like they, for lack of better terms, need to just take what's theirs at the end of the day. Like we have been activating Roxbury, Mattapan, Dorchester for a while, doing community centers. I used to throw parties in 9th grade at the Freedom House.
Okay.
And, White Church, Strand Theater, and we were playing all reggae, all soca. Like we were supporting that culture, like living that culture. And I feel like that culture has always been a building block, always been a foundation for the city of Boston. So I would love to see, you know, a nightclub or an area that's like the cultural center, you know, like all Latin nightclubs mixed with Caribbean nightclubs. Like, I would love to see something like that. And, you know, there are people in position that can make that happen. So, yeah, that would be like my greatest wish as a person who started DJing reggae and soca, you know, in the neighborhoods.
Yeah, and it's important to amplify that because that is a part of Boston.
Absolutely.
But we have this narrative that Boston's super wide and it's, again, a sports town or just pubs or maybe it's just Irish bars. No, there's so much a cultural diversity that makes up the city of Boston. We have 23 very unique neighborhoods. We need to celebrate that, we need to amplify that, and we need to change the narrative of what Boston looks like.
I say it all the time, but I'll say it for the, 4,080th time. Boston is not a white city. It's a city that has historically been complicit in a narrative of white supremacy.
Okay.
And yeah, we're title town, we're a sports city, we're a big tourism city, but if we want to be a city that people want to live in and want to thrive in and want to stay in, want to move to, nightlife is a part of recruiting people and it's retention, like keeping the people who are from here. If we don't offer outlets and joyful spaces, also economic opportunities, because nightlife is a very big economic stimulant. So let's talk about how nightlife benefits the city economically and just all the reasons I just said, like bringing people here, recruiting them for jobs, keeping the people who grew up here, because everyone thinks they got to go to LA or New York or DC or Atlanta.
A lot of part of my role is retention. So we want people to stay here that live here and people who come here to stay here and live here. But I also want to demystify what this role is, right? It's not just about bars, nightclubs, restaurants. It's also about our workforce at night that often gets forgotten about. A lot of people focus energy and resources on people who work from 9 to 5, but what about our hospital staff that are keeping us healthy and safe, like police officers and firefighters and the folks who are in our office buildings making sure that they're functioning for us when we get there at 9 a.m. Those are also the folks that we want to focus on when it comes to nightlife. It's a large economic driver. If you look at, we talked about Big Night, they employ 4,000 people. That is an extremely significant employer in this city. If we think about our hospitals, all of the people that our hospitals employ, these are economic drivers, and because they're in the evening time, they don't necessarily get the attention that they should be getting, the resources, the constituent services that they should be getting. And so that's why this role is important and why the night needs to be highlighted.
Yeah, stick around so you can party with us. That's it. Like, don't leave the city because we need you to come through and sing some Miss Deborah Cox or something like that. But no, I mean, I know a lot of people personally that have moved away for that exact reason. Like, there's nothing to do. Like, they want to be outside. They want to be able to walk into a space and not pay a $50 cover. They want to be able to just be themselves. And I feel like the city hasn't reached that point yet. It's getting there. And it's important that we keep our young professionals, we keep even our older generations. They want to go outside too and be with people that look like them and understand them. So yes, very important. I think it's something that is changing. This is the generation right outside of these windows that we need to be talking to and making sure we're letting them know they're important to this matter.
I think another element that's a big factor is just information. There's a lot of things that happen in the city and you just don't know. Like there's no central location and to just know what's going on in Boston. I feel like there's always something happening, and when people say there's nothing to do, I don't think that's the case at all. It's just people don't know what to do or where to go, or there's just a lack of information.
I always know what to do. I just don't know where to eat after midnight.
So I'll push back on that. Yes, there's always something happening, but I'll speak from the black and brown lens because that's the only lens I can speak from. Those things happening, it's like one thing that day, that's it. Where the entire demographic is coming to that one specific thing. And we need more options. Like, people should be able to say, there are 15 things happening in the city and I get to choose, or I can jump around. So I agree, there are things happening, and we know because we're in the know, we're in the industry. But you know, the lady who works every day and has one day off on a Saturday, like where does she look to find out what's happening?
Well, this is my time to tell people, pay attention to Boston While Black.
Yep.
Pay attention to Light Work. Pay attention to DJ Real Peace page, Baby in the Glow, all the DJs, DJ Baby in the Glow, Tofu. Follow I Am Boston. He really does plug everything. This one right here is really the ambassador for all new businesses. So if you follow her or just pay attention to her, she's always highlighting new businesses. So the stuff that we don't even know is coming yet, like she just put me on to a new karaoke bar.
I know she put me on too.
Yeah.
I'm going so nice.
A new bar by Live.
Oh, it's called Viva Karaoke. So they just took over the Limelight area that was in Chinatown, and Viva, it's been open for like maybe a week and a half or so. Beautiful space. If you want to be in front of a crowd, you can, but if you want your own private moment, they have 4 rooms for that, and they're going to expand it as well. So I'm really proud of them.
One of the things that has been a hurdle outside of finding food after midnight, shout out to Golden Gate and Double Chip. Outside of finding food after midnight is transportation. We all know like parking in Boston is a beast, and also if you're going out, you don't necessarily need to drive because you're drinking. And you know, the surcharges, I called an Uber from Hugh one time just a mile away, and it was almost $30 because of the surge.
Wow.
What are some things we're doing? And I know the T has lots of it could be a whole panel on its own, but we have a question from an audience, like, what ways are we working with the T to provide later service and more accessible service so that nightlife can be more, can flourish more?
Yeah, well, we just got a seat on the T board, the MBTA board, so Boston will be represented to amplify the Boston-specific issues that are important to us, but also are probably issues throughout the region that MBTA serves. It's one of those things where we're trying to create more, events that are hyper local as well throughout our neighborhood, so folks don't have to travel as much. So you should enjoy yourself. If you live in Allston, you should be able to enjoy yourself in Allston. If you live in JP, there should be a place for you in JP. So really focusing on the identities of our neighborhoods and try to create resources that are accessible. So if you want to be able to walk home, you have that option. So those are just some of the few things that we're working on that I can publicly say.
And then Rob and P, I'm asking you this because I know specifically how the pandemic affected each of you through the lens of Silk when I did that story and how it brought you two together. Can you talk a little bit about what both of you saw during the pandemic happening to nightlife and how things have changed since?
You want to start?
Well, I mean, clearly there was no nightlife during the pandemic, and as a person who depends on that as a release and to support my family, my 3 kids and my wife, I had to find a way, and I think we all, like all DJs, we took to Instagram and Twitch to be able to try to make some money, ask for some tips, have a release, but then we figured out like, wow, this is more of a release for the people at home than us. Like, I did a thing called Sundays Are for Soul every Sunday at 2 o'clock for 3 hours. And it started as just a joke, me just playing music, playing samples. I'm like 70 years old in my head, by the way. So I love like Motown records, I love disco. So I was playing all of that and really like manipulating the music, and I can see like people, I'm calling my mom, this reminds me of my dad, I need to call check on him. And it's like, that's the stuff we do it for. Like I realized this wasn't for me. This was for that person that was home by themselves, sitting there just listening. So Silk really took on a new meaning to me at that time. It started as a party, obviously, but I think at that time it really transformed into like this moment per se that's carrying over now. that represents love, like at the end of the day, you know, like once people come into Silk, like I try to go make my rounds and hug folks and kiss the babies and do all of that. And I don't do that for retention purposes or to have you come back. It's like, no, I really feel loved in here. Like, I'm really glad you're here to experience this with us. So I like weirdly thank the pandemic for like making me be more intentional about Silk instead of just like treating it as this event that happens every month.
For me, it was a good reset. You know, I was out maybe 4 nights a week at the time, like prior to the pandemic. And, you know, as P said, it was like a good time to be really intentional about what was gonna happen next or what I wanted to do next. And when I reached out to P, it's like, you know, Silk was something that I knew that I could help build and I enjoyed personally. You know, it was my lane, so to say. Like, I knew that I couldn't come out of the pandemic and throw parties in nightclubs with trap and whatever else. Like, it just wasn't me anymore. So I was happy that we got to connect and, you know, build what we built thus far. But during the pandemic, I also realized that, you know, as much as I needed the reset, I miss people. Like, I'm a connector. I like to network. I need that interaction with other people, like in person. So, you know, I was happy that, you know, once it was over, it's like, all right, let's get going. Like, P, let's do this.
Who's in there with masks, dancing together?
People want to be outside.
But, you know, the nightlife sector is one of the few spaces when I think about the pandemic and the alleged racial reckoning. So many promises were made and so many like, we're going to change, we're going to invest money. And a lot of that stuff has fallen to the wayside, except nightlife is one of the places in Boston specifically where I have seen opportunities that I did not see before the pandemic for people of color and queer folks to create space where space was taken before. And I think part of that is maybe because other businesses lapsed, and part of it is because stuff like space grants. Do you see that continuing, that like space making?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you know, Black and brown people, we express ourselves through music, right? I'm part Puerto Rican, and salsa is always a part of my family gatherings. There's always loud music, there's always dancing. That's how we express ourselves, that's how we release. And so creating more spaces like that is super important. So, and same with Black people, right? Like, drum and bass and all that. That's how we've expressed ourselves for years before we even got here to America, right? And so that's why it's bubbling up. That's why we're seeing more of it, because, you know, just like we create restaurants to express ourselves through food, we do what we know. We try to put our culture on display because that's what we know, that's what we're good at, and that's a way for folks to come in and learn about us. It's a tangible, palatable way for folks to indulge in our culture.
I would add that you know, change in leadership in the city has had a big impact as well. You know, it's not the days of old where we weren't represented whatsoever, and like, and now everywhere you turn, like, people look like us are in, you know, positions of leadership. So I think that's had a big impact as well.
Yep. Shout out to
Yeah.
and
to be
Mayor
honest,
Wu, Mayor Wu, Jessica
Mayor
Pierre,
Wu, yeah.
Shagun, Adola, so many.
And to be frank, I
John
mean,
Borders.
These club owners and club managers realize, man, Black people are the #1 consumers, and you know, if they ain't acting up in this club and, you know, we're selling out, it's a great time, you know. And mind you, we all act up, Black, white, Asian, doesn't matter. But like, you know, it's flourishing for them. Like, we're outside, we want to spend money, we want to fellowship, we want to be together. So that's part of the reason why it's opening up. It's more accessible as well.
And that's part of the reason why we need to be a nightlife city. It attracts more people, it keeps more people, and the money, the economic growth is there. My last question is, what makes your lives a beautiful resistance?
I would say that I show up authentically as me. I'm Black and Puerto Rican. I try to express myself through my cultural experiences, but then also my lived experience. I grew up traveling, I grew up singing. And I try not to stick to a stereotype and show that Blackness and being Latinx can show up differently. And I live in that. And I encourage others to live in that as well.
I just say that we are not one thing. You know, we can be many things. I would say that my life is a beautiful resistance because I think I'm very intentional about creating a more inclusive Boston. You know, it hasn't always been easy, but, you know, I just keep pushing forward and making the changes along the way and bringing people along for the ride.
Yeah, my life is a beautiful resistance because I'm never satisfied. I feel like I'm always want to go. I always want to keep elevating myself, keep elevating my community, my friends, my peers. Yeah, and I don't, when someone says no, I don't hear no. I hear, let's do it some other way. So, never satisfied.
Well, you and all of you are my beautiful resistance. Thank you.